Hello, my friends, and welcome to this Power BI tutorial. Now, Power BI right now is the hottest BI tool out there, but not just that, it is also going to be your gateway towards artificial intelligence or AI. Why is that? Because Microsoft has been busy integrating Copilot AI functionality right inside Power BI. So right now is an exciting time to be learning Power BI. Now, it may be exciting, but I also realize that the Power BI learning curve can be quite challenging at times. Maybe you have experienced some of that already. Well, fear not, because we're going to make it easy for you. We're going to break it down into the 5 steps that you need to master in order to master Power BI. And we're going to cover them each one by one, walk you through a demo that you can follow through as well, from connecting to multiple data sources all the way to publishing your report online. We're going to take you step by step, but as a bonus, we're also going to share some tips on how you can actually shorten that steep learning curve. So that's coming, so make sure you watch this video till the end. I'm Avi Singh, and even though now I'm a Microsoft MVP and a best-selling Power BI author, have a YouTube channel with 10 million plus views, and have helped thousands from all over the world through my LearnPowerBI.com training program, but I started perhaps where you are right now, in the data dungeon. That's where I was, struggling to create reports, often feeling overworked and underappreciated. And those two, by the way, are guaranteed signs that you might be in the data dungeon. But fear not, because we have a plan to get you and your team out of there by walking you through these 5 steps. If you really want to get the most out of this tutorial, I would recommend watching it twice. First, just watch the full tutorial and then come back and follow along with the download files. Now, this video has chapters built in, which you can use to navigate or jump to a specific chapter if you need, especially if you're coming back to watch it again. And this is the link where you can download the practice files to follow along with the tutorial. You would also find the link in the corner and down in the description below. Just one more tip. Change the quality settings to HD for the best video experience. Now, before we step into the demo and start walking you through these 5 steps, it is important to understand the problems that we are solving for. And these are the problems or challenges that every modern organization is facing right now. Number one is that their data is spread across these multiple systems. And I don't care if you have a fancy warehouse or a big ERP tool, there's always data in Excel files and CSV files and SharePoint lists and vendor data and partner data and data in your emails and all of those places. And that's the first thing we're going to show you, is how you can use Power BI to easily combine data from multiple sources. The next challenge that organizations are facing is that business data is messy data. But with Power BI, you would have the right tools to clean, shape, and transform your messy data. And even if you're able to do that, often the reports are just overflowing with formulas, and they are very complicated. They can be very hard to maintain or update. Power BI shows us an awesome new way, which almost sounds magical. Using the Power BI DAX measures, you define your formula only once and use it everywhere. And you're going to see that in action in our demo. And after you've put in all this hard work, what's the point of putting a boring report with tables and pivot tables? So this is the day and age to create modern, beautiful, and interactive reports, and Power BI lets you do just that. We're going to see that in our demo as well. And lastly, the old way of sharing reports, which is through email. It is clunky, it is 20th century, and you don't need to do that anymore, because Power BI gives you a very smooth, easy to use, and secure online way of sharing your reports where the users can access them from any device, their computer, their tablet, or their phone. Now, this was important for you to understand, because what you also need to understand is, imagine the impact that you can create for the team, the organization that you're working with, if you are able to solve these big 5 data challenges for them, the impact you create for them, and also, of course, for your own career or your business. So let's get started in solving these challenges at step number 1, connecting to multiple data sources. So again, the challenge we're dealing with is data is spread across these systems, and let's see how Power BI can deal with that. Here we are in the Power BI desktop, ready to get started, and we're going to do that by clicking on Get Data. Now that's the portal for you to connect to a whole bunch of data sources no matter where they are. Now it's going to show you some common data sources, but if you click on More, then you can see it. Power BI has a very long list of connectors. That means that pretty much no matter where your data lives, it's most likely that Power BI can connect to that. Even if you do not have a direct connector, you might be able to connect using an OData feed or API, or as a last resort by exporting data from your system. So I'm going to show you some examples of connecting to various sources, and let's start off with the really simple Excel workbook. So I'm going to select Excel workbook, and this is the file you should have if you got the download files as well. And I'm going to select the AdventureWorks database and just click open. Now, no matter which data source you're connecting to, once you're past the first few screens, it always just simply shows you the tables that it found inside that you can load into Power BI. And you can see you can click on the table to see a preview of that on the side over here. And we're going to simply select the first tables here: calendar, customer, product, sales, and territories, and click load. And what it's doing is it's going out to the data sources, fetching that data and importing it into Power BI. I should also mention that Power BI is extremely good at compressing data, and that's why you can work with data sets which are millions of rows or even larger than that. So now these tables are here. We can see them show up on the data pane, and if you were to navigate to the table view over here, you would be able to examine the actual data inside those tables. But again, remember, the problem that we are focusing on is how do we connect to data spread across these different systems. So as part of this demo, I want to show you 2 other connections. So on the left here, we have data sitting in a SharePoint site. This is some sort of a monthly commentary that the team is adding for each month, text commentary. And on the right, we have an Azure SQL database. So let's next connect to our SharePoint data list. So I'm going to go to Get Data again and click More. And this time I'm going to type in SharePoint in the search box here and select the SharePoint online list. After selecting that, I'm going to click Connect. Now it asks me for the site URL. Now just one note here that it's not looking for the complete URL or the URL to the list itself. It just needs the first part of that. So just copy the URL to the site itself, and then between these 2 options, 1.0 and 2.0, you know what, let's pick the latest 2.0. And that also gives you a really nice option here, which is instead of retrieving all columns, SharePoint lists have a lot of system columns which we don't really need or use. So instead, we're going to select the second option here, which is to retrieve the default view. With that all set, let's hit OK. And as I mentioned earlier, Power BI, no matter which data source you're connecting to, once you go through the initial screens, it simply shows you the tables that are available, and you can pick and choose from that. So from here, the one we're looking for is the monthly commentary. And again, I can click on it and just kind of at a glance see if it looks right, and it does. So I'm going to select that checkbox and click load, and you're going to see that this data gets loaded and added to my table set over here. And of course, I can again go to the table view, click on that table, and examine the data in itself. So already we have combined data from 2 different sources. Let's add one more, our Azure SQL database. So for that one, let's go back to Get Data, click More, and here I'm going to type in Azure. Azure SQL database is right there. I'm going to select that and click Connect. I'm just going to type in the server name and the rest of the options you can leave as default and just hit OK. And again, as before, it goes, examines the data set, and it comes back with the tables or the data sets it has found, and you can expand that and select the tables that you want to see. As you can see, as before, I have access to all the tables. I can click around to see what's inside the table. And again, this is just a test, so I'm going to just select this table and load it into our model. But again, this is coming from our Azure SQL database. Now, once this is done, it's time to lift the hood and take a peek inside what's going on, which is this get data functionality really uses the Power Query engine inside that. And we're going to talk a lot more about Power Query in this tutorial, but the way to access Power Query is by clicking on the transform button, data button over here. So if you go there and click transform data, notice that it opens a new window here. And this is what I call the kitchen of Power BI. This is where the magic happens. Now, I'm just going to quickly refresh the preview because it's complaining about that. All right, so as you can see that all the tables that we had connected to are actually coming through the Power Query engine. And I'm just going to rename this one table just so we can differentiate this. So this one is coming from Azure SQL. This one is coming from, this is a SharePoint list. Now, what I wanted to show you is a really cool feature inside the Power Query, which is the Query Dependencies view. And you access that by clicking on this view icon over here and then clicking on this Query Dependencies view here. Now, what this shows you is a visual view of all of your data sources and how they're being manipulated, changed, transformed, or combined. And of course, what I want to point out here is you can see how in the same data model, in the same data set, we have data coming from an Excel file, from a SharePoint file, and from the Azure SQL database. And not just that, it's not about just connecting and loading these data sets. We could even combine these two tables or do some kind of a lookup or any other processing that we need to do across data coming from all the data sources. So we started with this problem of data being everywhere, and now you can see how easily you can use Power BI to combine data from all different sources. We are ready for step number 2, cleaning messy data. And that's the truth, my friends. Business data is messy data. Now, we wish it was like this, and sometimes if you talk to IT or somebody who has built a fancy warehouse for you, this is what they would like you to believe. It's like, oh yeah, just connect to this data set and it's all clean. But in reality, it never works this way. The reality is more like this. But that is where the good news lies, is that now you don't no longer have to be afraid of messy data. In fact, you can fall in love with messy data. Let's see how using Power BI. So we're back in Power BI and we are going to be connecting to a very messy file, the budget data. Now you might look at this and you would say, Avi, what are you talking about? This is not messy. This is so clean and beautiful. Well, what I would say is this is where humans and machines, you have to understand how we are different. So this is what I call a human-friendly data. So it's formatted to really work for a human. But if you feed it to a machine, it'll probably not be very happy about it, for some good reasons. So what Power BI would complain about is that you have these header rows, which I don't really care about. I don't need that. You have this coloring, which doesn't matter to me. I can't even read the coloring here. You have these grand totals, which are redundant because I can calculate that using these months. You have these subtotals, which are also redundant. And the fact that this data is spread across these columns, that's really awkward for me. So you can see how from a Power BI perspective, this is indeed messy data. And of course, we run into lots and lots of scenarios when working with real business data and trying to fit it into Power BI. But guess what? We have talked about the kitchen of Power BI. Let's step back into that and let's see how we can clean, shape, and transform any messy business data. Now, before I move forward though, I'm just going to remove the Azure table from the model and the SharePoint list. So I just wanted to demonstrate that you can connect to multiple data sources. But let's go there again. Let's click Get Data and Excel Workbook. And this time I'm going to select the other file, which is part of your download files, the budget file. And I'm going to click Open. And this time from the Get Data dialog box, I would select this, but instead of clicking Load, I'm going to click Transform Data, which simply opens up the kitchen of Power BI again, which is the Power Query editor. So I'm going to maximize the Power Query window and just familiarize you a little bit with this interface. So again, Power Query, think of it as stepping into the kitchen of Power BI. And just as kitchen has a lot of appliances to help you prepare your food, the Power Query interface has all of those gadgets and appliances up here in this rich ribbon with lots of different tabs. And you're going to be seeing some of them in action as we try to clean this messy data. On the left here, you see a list of queries of these are the tables that have been loaded. And on the right here, you see the name of the currently selected query. And this name is also how it's going to be loaded back into Power BI. So that name is important. And the lovely part, the applied steps. And I'm going to ask you to keep a close eye on that. And in fact, we will start there. Now, Power BI, when you connect to a data set, it tries to take its best guess on how it needs to be processed and often adds automatic steps. Well, in this case, those steps are not helpful and we don't really need them. First thing I would like you to do is to hover over this change type and just click X to delete that step. And do the same for the next promoted headers step. Again, hover over that, click on the red X, and it's deleted. And now we're ready to start the cleanup. And if you look back at that file, the first thing that we had noticed were these header rows that we do not need. And again, as I had said, the kitchen has lots of appliances. So right here, we have the remove rows selection right here. So I'm just going to go there, remove rows, remove top rows, select that, and in this case we need to remove 3 rows from the top. And I'm going to hit OK. Now you notice that that step gets recorded over here. Let's do a few more steps and I'll come back and talk more about this recording. Now the next thing we want is this first row, category, subcategory. These are actually headers. And boy, I wish there was a button I could click to promote these as headers. Well, guess what? Of course there is. That is right here. Use first row as headers. So I don't have to select that row, but yeah, as long as you're in this interface, click use first row as headers. And again, notice that that step is recorded as promoted headers. And Power BI does like to add sometimes this automatic change type step. I'm not a fan of that, so I'm just going to hover over the red X and delete that too. The promoted headers is still the same. And you can see that in action over here. We got a bit more cleanup here to do. You can see we have the subtotals here and the grand total here. And all I'm going to do is click on this column and say text filters, and I'll say does not contain the word total. Now, one word of warning that Power Query is case sensitive. So if you do not use the right case, like if you use the lowercase t, it's probably not going to work. So watch out for that. It is case sensitive. So it does not contain total. And if I click again, that step is recorded over here, filtered rows, and you can see that those rows have disappeared from here. Now, if you remember that Excel file, it had that grand total, which we didn't want. It's redundant. The machine doesn't need it. We're just going to go select that column and right click and say remove. And again, that step gets recorded and you can see that that column indeed has been removed. And now for the final act. And this is one of my favorites because in the old world of the old Excel, I used to struggle so much when needed to do something like this, which is again, this data, the fact that it is spread across these columns is unnatural for Power BI. And if you leave it this way, you're going to have a lot of challenges in the next steps when you start defining the Power BI formulas or DAX measures. So what we need to do is to take these columns and turn them into rows, an action that is called unpivot. So yeah, I really struggled to do this, but let me show you how you can do that in Power BI. We're going to select the columns that need to be unpivoted. And guess what? We just right click and say unpivot columns, and bada bing, bada boom, you can see all the data that was in columns is now neatly into rows. And we can change this to say this is the month. We can change this to say this is the budget amount. And finally, remember when it kept adding those automatic change type steps? Now I'm ready to specify the type. So I'm going to click on the icon next to the column name here. And I'm going to say this one is a whole number. This is a key or an ID. This one is actually a date. So I'm going to select date. And this one is a fixed decimal number or currency, and that step is recorded as well. Now I had said that I'm going to come back and talk about this steps being recorded here. Often when people see this, and in fact even when I first saw this, then coming from an Excel background, my reaction was, oh, this is like macros. But guys, there's a rule when you compare anything new in Power BI to something in that old world, you have to add the mandatory words, but way more awesome. So yeah, you can think of it as like macros, but it is way more awesome. And let me tell you why. So in Excel macros, if you have used them, you know the challenge is that recording them is easy, but what happens when you need to make a change? It becomes kind of a nightmare. Either you need to re-record the whole macro or roll up your sleeves and dive into that really complicated code. Now you might have been noticing that Power BI in the backend is generating what's called the M code or the M language, but the best part, 99% of the time, you don't have to worry about the code. And even when you need to change steps, changing a query is as easy and it's the same experience as recording a new query. So you can go in here and you've already seen me deleting steps. If you want to change a step, you can click on the gear icon next to that and change the logic there. If you wanted to insert a step, you can go back to any previous step and just click on a button and it'll insert that step for you there. And of course, you're already seeing how it's awesome because you can really go step by step through these recorded steps and see exactly the transformations that was done, which is another incredible thing about Power BI and Power Query specifically, which is that it is self-documenting. Now, documenting how you created a report, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to keep the documentation updated. And now with Power BI, it's automatic, right? Because anybody new who's maybe taking over the report, or if you come back to this report in a month, you can come back and easily see exactly what was done. That makes it super easy to maintain Power BI models and update them. Let's finally hit close and apply. And now we're going to step out of the kitchen of Power BI, and Power BI is now going to fetch that data and load that into our Power BI data model. And you can see that table has been loaded. We can again navigate to the table view and click on the budget table to actually examine the data if we wanted. So we started with some human-friendly but machine-messy data, and we have been able to clean it up and load it into Power BI. And all of these tables, no matter how many different data sources they're coming from, can be refreshed with just a single click of this button. And Power Query is gonna replay all of the steps that we have recorded for cleanup and data transformation and refresh all of our data. And what's even better, that you can also set up a fully automatic refresh. And that means your users will always have access to the very latest information. So my friend, you no longer need to be afraid of messy data. In fact, it's time to fall in love with it. The next big problem that we often see is the formula spaghetti. And I'm going to share some real examples. So I was working with a client and they gave me an Excel file that they wanted to convert to Power BI. and I clicked on one of those cells, and there's this long formula there. And I'm like, okay, take a deep breath. We can do this. But then, of course, as soon as I clicked on each of those cells, they were formulas as well. And that's what we end up with, formulas and endless formulas. And there's one other nightmarish example. This is a Google Sheet. So, yep, Microsoft Excel, Google Sheet, doesn't matter. And this is a problem, because something like this, anybody who has done it, and I did for many, many years before I switched to Power BI, it can be very hard to maintain, it can be error prone, and very hard to update. And that's the challenge, because business is always changing, reporting always needs to change to adapt to the new business needs, and that the formula spaghetti makes it truly challenging. Let's see how Power BI redefines that using the magic of DAX formulas or DAX measures, which you define once and use everywhere. So we're in our file. Now this one is the 03 starting file. So what I did is, as chefs do on the cooking show, they kind of put it in the oven and then they take another one out, which is somewhat ready. So I did do a little bit of work. I updated some of the data types for the calendar table. I made sure all the relationships were set up accurately. Now, relationships, that is part of a bigger concept of data modeling, is a very core concept of Power BI that you need to master. You need to understand how relationships work, how one-to-many, what is the default, what are the best practices, the data tables, the lookup tables, or as I like to call them, giraffes and hippos. There's a lot more there. We're not going to quite be able to dive into that, but you can just start with the 03 file and go from there. It's all set up for you, and we're going to be focusing on simply the sales table right now for our DAX measures. So on our sales tables, we have these relationships set up with the lookup tables, the who, what, where, when. And if we switch back to our report view, now what you would realize is that you would feel that, oh, I don't need to create DAX measures, because I can just drag that column here and it gives me that math, and I can do other things, and I can add category to it, and I can see it broken down. I can change it to a table or a matrix, and you can say that, yep, look, it is doing the calculation for me. Now, I just want to warn you that if you do want to progress in your journey, you need to understand that what's happening even right now is that Power BI is indeed defining a DAX measure for you. The only difference is that this is what's called an implicit measure. So Power BI is doing it for you without telling you about it. But if you really want to have control, if you really want to get good at Power BI, you want to make sure you switch to what are called explicit measures, which is when you define them, right? So this is the sales, this is the implicit measure. We're going to get into the sales table, and I'm going to just hover over the table, just click on the three dots here and select new measure. And this drops me in this formula bar here. And the first thing, I'm going to change the measure name. Let's call it sales. And then the same thing, which earlier was an implicit measure, I'm going to define it explicitly using the sum function. So this one is pretty straightforward. So sum and autocomplete helps. So I want the sales amount column from the sales table, and I can just click that and it completes. I'm going to close the bracket, and that is looking good. I'm going to click the checkbox, and you can see that measure is defined, and you can see how it has a different icon, which lets me know that this is a measure and this is special. Now let's add this to the let's switch it back to a simple table. Oh, by the way, you probably already noticed there are a few different ways you can change the visual. You can either select the visual, and from the Home tab, you can expand this panel and change that to a different visual. Or if you have the Build a Visual pane visible here, you can also select from there. So if you notice here, we have the implicit measure, and this is the explicit measure, and explicit measure is the way to go. So I'm going to remove that implicit measure. I'm going to keep this sales measure. And let's first of all, increase the font a little bit. What is the size. There we go. All right, that's much better. And by the way, the style that I like to use Power BI is if you go to the view panel, then expand the pane switcher. These are the settings that I use in the current version of Power BI. Now this might change, but let me show you how it works. I generally like to have all of these panes enabled so I can open and close them as I need. So I'll have all of them available. I'm just going to close them here, and then whichever one I need, I can open that. And the favorite ones, and the ones I want you to focus on, is the data pane, and then build a visual pane, and the format pane, right? Okay, so we're back here. We have our measure. Let's go back and select our sales measure. Now, when you select the sales measure, you would notice that the ribbon at the top changes, and it gives you specific options based on what's selected. If you select a table, it's going to take you to table tools. If you select a column, it's going to show you column tools. So I'm going to select my measure again, and I want to get in here because I want to just pretty it up a little bit. I want to format it as a currency, and the decimal places, I would just like to show 0 decimal places. You can see it cleaned it up a little bit. All right, so I'm actually going to remove the category here, and I'm going to select the calendar month and bring that in here. Oops, I thought I'd fixed everything. So let's fix the month sorting. So I'm going to select the month column, and that automatically enables the column tools. And there you want to focus on sort by column. So right now you can notice it's sorting it alphabetically, which isn't great. We want to just go in here and tell Power BI to sort the month using the month number. And now it's sorting January through December. By the way, you can also have fiscal years. For example, at Microsoft, the fiscal year started with July and ended with June. I have a separate video on that focused on calendars. So now we have this now, but however, this is across multiple years. So let's bring in the year. I'm going to drag a year over here, and I'm going to change this to a slicer. So I'm going to click the slicer, or you can expand this and you can see slicer. There's this new slicer, and I like the classic one, so I'm going to stick to that. And I would like to change its style. Slicer settings. Oops. So I'm going to change, so on the format pane, I'm going to change it to a vertical list. That's simple and nice, so I like that. And we're going to select 2023. So now we're looking at 2023 sales. And again, right now we're focused on DAX measures. So we're going to define another measure to show us the sales for prior year. Now this is something that is often done. You compare a value to its previous year. And let's see how we can do that using DAX measures. So I'm going to go to my sales table again, hover over that, click on the 3 dots and say new measure. And I'm back in my formula bar up top. And I'm going to change the measure name to say sales prior year. And now I'm going to pull out what I call the magic wand of Power BI, or at least DAX, which is the calculate function. It is truly magical. Now, when I show this, sometimes people compare it to the sum if in Excel. But you know the golden rule already. Whenever you compare something in Power BI to something in the old world, you have to add the mandatory words, but way more awesome. So yes, you can think of this as sum if, but it's way more awesome. And calculate, this is how it works. Calculate, the first parameter is that what do you want to be calculated? In this case, I really want to calculate sales, but for the prior year. So the first expression is just sales. Now this is where the magic starts, where you can specify additional parameters to it. And in this case, we're going to use one of the time intelligence functions. And time intelligence, by the way, time intelligence or date intelligence is one of my favorite areas in Power BI, and I love using that because it's so easy to do and so effective. So for calculate sales for prior year, we're going to use the function same period last year. So I'm going to complete that. And then as its parameter, what it needs is the date column from my calendar table. So I can just type in, let's try date. Let's see if it finds it. Let's try calendar date. There we go. So I'm going to specify that, and that completes my measure. And I'm going to click the checkbox. I'm going to format this measure while I have this selected. I'm just going to change this to a currency and change this to 0 decimals. And let's see how it works. So I'm going to click on this button to add it to my table. And you can see it's showing me that 2023 January sales were 886,000, and the prior year it was at 500,000. And I can validate that by going back to 2022 and notice that it did indeed in 2022 January, the current year sales was 500K. So it's showing me year over year. But hey, I had promised you some magic. I mean, this is nice, but it's not magical. Let me show you the magical part. So in the old world, everything was a formula. And as soon as I showed a report to somebody and I could have built something exactly what they asked for, inevitably, and this is how BI works, this is how human beings work. So somebody can say that, hey, this is great, but show me this by the territory where we were selling this. And it's as easy as I just made a copy of that table and I'm going to swap out that month and instead bring in from my territory the country column. And there we go. That is sales and sales prior year. And of course, you can keep going and you can slice and dice this data any which way you want using any of these attributes, using the customer attributes, product attributes, territories, or calendar. You can show this as a table. You can show this as a graph. So I copied this again, and let's set this up as a line chart. And I'm going to maximize it just so you can see that now it's showing you sales year over year as a trend. And I'm going to copy this one over here and show this as a column chart. So now you can see sales versus sales prior year for each territory. And I hope you see the magic. The magic is that we didn't rewrite that formula even once. We didn't touch the sales formula or the sales prior year formula. And that is the truly magical part of Power BI. The formulas are defined just once, but you can use them everywhere. You can take the same formula and you can slice and dice using any of these tables. And it could be something which is somewhat simple, like the sales prior year. I mean, it's nice, but it's still pretty straightforward. Or it could be something more interesting, like analyzing new customers or customer churn rate or anything else that you can think of or your business needs. So folks, we're going from this world of formula spaghetti, formulas everywhere, to the magic of DAX, where you define once and use everywhere. We're on to step 4, creating rich and interactive visualization. And the problem that we're solving for is that after we have put in all this hard work of connecting the data sources, cleaning up the messy data, defining our formulas, you don't want to put out just those boring reports with tables and more tables and maybe pivot tables. Let's think beyond that, and let's think modern, beautiful, and interactive reports. So we're going to build something like this, and let's just look at the end result. Now, I intentionally try to keep my reports simple, because simple can be beautiful, simple can be effective, and this is what I call the power pattern. So generally, when I build reports, I try to follow this pattern, at least for the first reports that I build out for my client. After that, we can dive into more advanced stuff. But when you're starting out, following the power pattern is a great idea. And it's simple as starting off with high-level numbers at the top. So right at a glance, we can see how the company is doing, right? So you got the high level over there, And then you want to give them some breakdowns based on the things that they're interested in. So maybe in this case, the customer is interested in seeing the sales broken down by country, or broken down by the product category, or broken down by the customer occupation, like who's buying. So you start with the high level data, give them some breakdowns, and then you give them the trend so they can see kind of over time how things are going. And then, and only then, do you go to tables, which can show you a little more detail. And in this case, we're using those to show us the top customer and the top products. So a little bit more detail. And all of this works together. And that's the beauty of it, that it's fully interactive. Any element is interactive, so you can click on United States and see exactly everything updates. It's showing you only information for that. And of course, you could do that for a different country, or you could go and select a specific occupation, or you could say, show me this occupation in United States. Now, for that last trick, you do have to hold down the control mouse button. But again, you can slice and dice it, and that makes these reports so rich and powerful for customers to use. To start building this, you can go to the 04 begin file, and we'll start from there. We'll start from this blank slate, and again, following the power pattern, let's put the high level numbers right up top. But before that, we need to add actually I already have that filter in place. Let's actually redo that. So you're going to have the filter pane here, and I'm going to expand the data pane, and from the calendar, I'm going to find the year and add it as a filter to this page. And then I'm going to change this from advanced filtering to basic filtering. That just gives me a simple drop down, and I'm going to select 2023. So now I have that year selected, and we can go ahead and start populating the high level metrics for this year. We're going to start with the sales, and that is our card visual, but I want to change it to the new card, which would let me add multiple values to it. So for this visual, if I drag and drop another measure, actually it changes that to a card. All right, anyway, let's go back and change this. I'm going to turn this suggest a type on. I think that's what's tripping me up. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to change this to the new card visual, which is this one. And again, I actually do like this drop down better, shows up much better, and the one that I'm looking for, this new card visual. So we have that, and I like the look of that, although we are going to have to customize that a little bit. Okay, so we have the sales and sales prior year, and let's add the year over year change to that, and let's add the year over year change percentage. Now you can see that some of these headers are being truncated. Now I like to have my measure names to be descriptive, so when I look at this measure name, I know exactly what it's about. But when I'm displaying it in the report, you can see that sometimes you can run into challenges like this, where it's just too big to fit. And in that case, you can simply go here and double click that name. I don't know if you can right click. Oh yeah, you can right click and say rename for this visual, or you can just double click. And I'm going to just shorten it to say YOY, year over year change. And now it fits there. Let's do some other things. Let's get in here, and I'm going to I already have the format pane open. So in there, and again, building a dashboard is a bit art, bit science. Now, I would strongly encourage you to ground yourself in the core concepts of the best practices for visualizations. And of course, we do cover that in detail inside my course if you're interested, but you're going to get a glimpse of that. So here, I'm just going to go with a light touch, and for the call out values, I'm going to turn off, or let's go to cards, I think, and I'm going to turn off the border. And for the values, I would like to show a single decimal there. So I'm going to select in the call out values section here. So right here, call out values. And you can also use the search bar if you get lost in here. So I'm going to select the series sales, and I'm going to change the decimal to 1. Do the same thing for sales prior year, change the decimal to 1. and for year-over-year change. So that's looking nice. Oh, I'm also going to change the sales prior year. Notice how that's getting truncated. So I'm just going to double click and I'll just call it prior year. Okay, so sales is this, prior year is this, year-over-year change. Okay, now that's looking good. And I just wanted to pop out a little bit more. This is the big visual at the top, which I want the user to start by focusing on. So I'm going to add a light background color. And folks, if you're starting out and you find some of this is hard to find, don't worry, I get lost in it myself. That's not the important part. You can navigate and find your way through that. What's important is what you're going to see here is that if you build the model right, if you clean up the data, build your model right, define your DAX measures correctly, the visuals is the easy part. Like you might spend some time kind of tweaking this and tweaking that, but it might be time taking, but it's not hard. It's not challenging. In fact, I always feel like a kid in a candy store and I'm like, ooh, I want this, I want that. And that's what we're going to be doing in this report to build out the final report that we're trying to get towards. All right, so let's come in here and size and style. And I think I want a background. I just want a light color. Maybe this is good enough. And yeah, just a light touch. So I'm going to keep that. Ooh, I realized that my cards have a white background. So the whole visual has a background, which is what I want. But I don't really want the cards to have a background. So I'm going to turn that off. Okay, this is the look that I'm going for. Kind of muted. I like it. Again, as I said, a bit of art, bit of science, but this does follow the best practices. Okay, let's see what other elements we need. So for this, let's bring in our sales measure. So I'm just going to pop that over there. And we need a bunch of bar charts. So we have sales and we need this by country. So I'm going to select country. That is looking good. That was nice and easy. I'm just going to copy that one. Just make some space here. And this is what I was talking about. You feel like a kid in a candy store. Like, oh, sales by country. Boom, done. And let's go to the build a visual. And this one I'm going to change to, instead of country, I want the customer occupation. And again, this would depend on your specific data set, what your client or what the user is interested in. And we're zooming in this case. They're very interested in finding out about who is buying, where are they buying, who's buying it, and what are they buying. So let's do the last one. So again, I'm going to copy paste this one and change this country to the product category. And in here, I'm going to click on add data and add the product subcategory, which is going to become a drill down. So you have the drill down controls over here. You can navigate those, or you can also right click and say drill down. So bikes, I can drill down to mountain bikes, and then I can drill up. I can also drill up and down using the right click. So I can drill down and then I can say drill up. Either way, it gives us, it is a little bit richer functionality. What I've found is that it may not be intuitive to a new user. So if your users are really new to Power BI, you may have to guide them the first time and tell them about the drill down functionality here. And the last one, of course, is the trend. So again, I'm just going to copy this element here and change this to a line chart, but we don't want category or subcategory here. We really want the calendar month in there. So let's try that. So yep, we can see that sales by month, and we also need additional measure, the sales prior year. So I'm going to go there and click and add the sales prior year. And now we have that in here. Now I was showing you this add legend title. I don't really want that or care about that. So I'm going to turn that off by going to the format pane, and the title, the legend title, I'm going to turn it off, and that looks a little bit cleaner. And of course you can do other cleanup here too. So hey, we're making good progress here. All we need are the detail tables here for top customers and top products. So let's go ahead and build those. I'm just going to make some more room for that here, and let's just see. Yeah, this looks good. Maybe this can scoot over a little bit. All right, okay, so let's start by adding a table element. And I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to add firstly the customer full name. and then I'm going to add sales. Great, but notice that it's actually showing all customers. Now, of course, I can just simply sort it descending by sales, and now it's showing me the top customers, but maybe I only want to see the top 10 customers. So for that, I'm going to go to the filter pane, and in here, I already have these fields on this visual. So in this case, I only want to filter this visual, and I'm going to expand the full name, and I'm going to change this to filter type to top N, and I can say top 10, or you could use a different number if you liked, but it's asking me top 10 by what? And the answer is just simply sales. So that one is easy. So I'm just going to go to my data field and find the sales measure and just drag it over here. And now the apply filter lights up, and let's see it in action. So notice how it's a long scroll bar right now, and you can pop out the measure, the visual, go into focus mode, and you can see it's a long list of people. But as soon as I go here and click apply filter, now it's down to the 10. I don't know if we need the total here, and I'm going to go ahead and format and turn the totals off. That's a little bit cleaner. So top 10 customers. And I'm just going to go back to format pane again, find the size, and I'm looking for the global size, I think. There we go, global font size, and just increase that a little bit. Maybe 10 is good. So we have that, and I'm just going to copy paste that visual, and now we need top products. Come back here and change the full name to the specific product, the product name. And this is a bit wider, so I'm going to give it some room, and I'm going to go back and remove that filter on full name, doesn't make sense, and add the same filter in product name. Again, same steps, select top N filtering, top 10, and here I'm going to add sales, apply filter, and there we go. So you saw how easy it is to build these reports in Power BI, especially when you've done all the hard work, where you've connected to all your data sources, where you've cleaned up the data, created a beautiful model by defining the data in the lookup table and the relationships, define your measures, and then you are a bit like a kid in a candy store where you just say, yep, give me this, give me that, and you just kind of click around and build that. This makes it fun to build these reports, and your users are going to have fun using these as well, because it's so much different than the static reports that they could be used to, where a single report can answer so many of their questions. And of course, this is just the starting point. There's so much more Power BI can do on creating beautiful visualization. And as I say, the world is your oyster there. So no more boring reports. Let's create some beautiful, interactive, lovely reports in Power BI. I am so proud of you for making it all the way to our last step, and this is perhaps the most beautiful. So the problem is that even though we're in the 21st century, but we still keep doing things the old way of sharing reports. Let's for a second talk about sharing video files. Now imagine if today you needed to share a video file with somebody and you did not use YouTube, you did not use Facebook or Google Photos or any other online tool like this. Instead, you tried to email them the MP4 file, and maybe it's like 1.5 gigs or something large. Now that would be pretty silly, and nobody would really try to share a video file that way. But then why do we keep trying to share our reports the same way? There are these Excel and PPT and PDF and flying around or spread across our different folders. Let's find a modern way to share reports. And it couldn't be any easier. So if we go back to our file, we have built a beautiful dashboard. We're ready to share it with others. And all you have to do is just click this publish button. That's it. So you click on that. Now, if you're not signed in, you may have to sign in or even create an account for the first time. But you click publish, and then you can choose a workspace. By default, if you're just starting out, you can also just publish it to my workspace. I'm going to choose the AdventureWorks workspace because this is an AdventureWorks reports, and I'm going to click publish. Now it does its thing, and now my report is online, and I'm going to click open to open and view that report. So here we go, and it opens in my browser right away, and I can see it's all there. I have the fully interactive, beautiful report. But of course, the easy part, now I can share it with others just by a click of a button. So I'm going to click share, and I can type in the name of my colleagues and share this report with them. Now, this does require Power BI licensing. We have a separate video which covers Power BI licensing in more detail. We'll link to that. But really, the mechanism of publishing and sharing your report couldn't be easier. And not just that, there are a lot of other benefits to publishing your reports online. And one of those benefits is that Power BI reports can easily be accessed on your mobile device as well. So this can be on your tablet, on your phone, using the Power BI app. So my friend, as you walk through this tutorial, you have solved some of the biggest challenges that organizations face when dealing with data, and now you're ready to have that impact for your team, for your clients, and for your own career. So where do you go next from here? Now, I had promised that I will not only give you the steps, I'll also tell you how you can shorten this learning curve, which can be steep at times. So let's talk about that, and let's start with some of the mistakes that beginners make when they're starting out in Power BI, and they make their own life a lot more challenging than it needs to be. And the first mistake that they make is that they try to learn through this jigsaw puzzle of Google and YouTube and always trying to fit it together, and that can be really frustrating. The next mistake that people make is that instead of focusing on the core concepts, they're just kind of mile wide and inch deep and just trying to learn a little bit of here, a little bit of there, instead of grounding themselves in the core concepts first, which is going to make the rest of the journey in Power BI a whole lot easier. And the last part is they just try to do it alone. And what that means is they often get stuck, and it can be really frustrating to be stuck on a problem for sometimes days or even weeks or months and not be able to make that progress. And of course, a lot of people, they get so frustrated that they even quit the whole journey and they go back to doing things the old way. I don't want you to be making those mistakes. Instead of trying to learn everything, focus on the core concepts. And we hinted at some of these during this tutorial. We talked about how data modeling is one of the core concepts. We talked about DAX measures, but we didn't get to talk about what's called a DAX filter context. Now, these core concepts are important to understand, and they're not that hard either. What you need is a structured program which shows these to you and explains these to you step by step so that you master the 20% of the core concepts that's going to give you 80% of the result. That is the smart way of learning Power BI. That way you can get quicker results with less effort. So that's number one. And the next thing is that instead of just staying stuck in this learning mode, theory has to come with practice. That is true learning. So as you're learning, you want to start applying this to your data sets, and that's where the real learning is going to happen. Now, of course, the challenge there is that as you apply with your own data set, you would often keep getting stuck. That's where a community or a coach really helps. And if you have both, that's great, because that's going to help you get over these roadblocks and make sure you don't lose that momentum. Make sure you keep moving forward and making progress in your Power BI journey. So these three things are truly important in your learning journey. And of course, that is why Learn Power BI training program has been designed on those exact same principles. And if you go to the website and scroll down, you can find some examples of the kind of results that our members have been achieving through this program. And these are folks just like you who started in the same place. And if you want to see more, you can check out our wall of inspiration that has a lot more stories and videos of what our members have achieved and what they're saying about the program. So check it out, and once you're ready, go back to the training page, click on the Apply Now button to apply and join the program, and I'll see you inside our Learn Power BI family.